You're listening to the Tales of Leadership podcast. This podcast is for leaders at any phase on their leadership journey to become a more purposeful and accountable leader, what I like to call a pal. Join me on our journey together towards transformational leadership. All right, team, welcome back to the Tales of Leadership podcast. I am your host, Josh McMillian, an active duty Army officer and the founder of McMillian Leadership Coaching. And I am on a mission to end toxic transitional leadership and promote transformational servant leadership. And I plan to do that by sharing transformational stories and transformational skills. And my goal is to build a better leader, what I like to call a purposeful, accountable leader, or a pal. And then on today's episode, I am going to be interviewing Clint Keeley. He is a retired command sergeant major with 2 decades of dedicated service in the Army and is profoundly thankful for his valuable skills and experiences that he's gained. And you can really get that in this episode that we go through. Currently, Clint is an integral part of a company that's called Propel, and they're focused on coaching and training and mentoring, or OCT, observer, coach, trainer. And I love that because it kind of goes back to what one of my main jobs was as a company grade officer. His professional focus revolves around the dynamic field of consulting with a particular passion for change management. Clint leverages his experience in leadership development training, program management coaching to facilitate transformational journeys, and he is a phenomenal leader. Again, he rose to the rank of command sergeant major, the highest rank in the Army that you can achieve, and had over 20 plus years in the military with multiple deployments. So as always, make sure you stay to the very end, and I'm going to provide you an AER what the top 3 takeaways are for this episode. Let's go ahead and bring on Clint. Clint, welcome to the Tales of Leadership podcast, brother. How you doing?
Oh man, it's a great morning here in Texas. Starting to cool down a little bit.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's Texas is kind of where you ended up and you landed.
I mean, it's God's country, right? Like every veteran comes back to Texas, I think.
Yeah. What part of Texas, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so we built our forever home right west of Fort Worth on 10 acres, beautiful house, beautiful land. And I find myself taking care of the yard on my off days.
It's a small world. My sister, she lives outside of Fort Worth in Burleson. She works on like the tram or the train metro that they have down there. So that's awesome. She retired out of the Navy and then she moved back to Texas.
Well, if you come down to Burleson, let me know. We'll grab a coffee, man.
Yeah, brother. Well, hey, so starting off with this, just take the time to kind of introduce yourself. Who is Clint to the listeners?
Yeah, my name is Clint Keeley. Currently a consultant with Propeller Consulting. Spent 21 years in the Army, retired as a command sergeant major. Been married to my wife, Shannon, for 21 full years, and got four kids. One's older and 3 littles at the house still.
So I always love bringing people on from the standpoint of having different perspective when it comes to leadership. So I have like Navy, I've had Marines, I've had a lot of officers on, but I really haven't had the pleasure and honor really to have a lot of senior non-commissioned officers on. So I'd love to kind of hear from your perspective how you define leadership in your terms.
Yeah, fantastic question, right? And I was thinking about this coming on this podcast, what leadership meant to me while I wore the uniform, and how does that translate to the civilian sector now, right? And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of parallels, but leadership to me, I mean, we'd go the textbook answer of, providing guidance and direction and motivation to get the mission done. But I really think it goes deeper than that, right? Like it's leadership is putting yourself out front and always doing that nobody else wants to do, right? Like, hey, we're going to do this. I'm asking you to do this, and I'm going to do it with you, right? And I think it's leading by example and walking the path with somebody else.
Yeah, there's a quote that I kind of always go back to by John Quincy Adams. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader. So I read that quote, and in my mind, that's exactly what you're just saying, is that it just resonates exactly, encompasses what leadership is. So you joined the military. You spent over 20 years and retired at the rank of sergeant major. Where do you think your leadership journey started?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to set the stage. I joined prior to 9/11, and I was
Mm.
in basic training when the Twin Towers were hit. And
Oh, wow.
so I joined with a thought of maybe I'll go to Kosovo, maybe I'll do a Korea, and then I'll be out. And then I was in buddy aid class, and the drill sergeants came in, said privates were going to war, and my perception of what my obligation to the United States government would be and to the people changed and flipped on its night. And so from that moment, just everything just changed in basic training. The concept, the feel, there seemed to be more like the sense of realness to it. It's hard to
Mm.
describe because you're in basic training, you don't know anything. But looking back on it, things just changed, and maybe it was the leadership took it more seriously, or maybe us trainees took it more seriously too. And then I think multiple deployments to Iraq hones and shapes your perception of leadership too, because we can talk about inspiring people in the workplace, but those leadership results or lack of results would have a clear impact if you made it home or didn't make it home, right?
Yeah. So we always, when we were doing training exercises like NTC rotations, and especially when I was an OCT, there was a distinct difference between units that were going to go overseas and actually go to war after like a culminating event at the brigade level, and those that were not. And in my mind, I think what you just said, kind of going back and hitting that point again, is it's because there was an actual training event that they were leading up to, an actual real world scenario. So people took it much more serious because their lives at the end of the day were going to be online. Like, hey, I'm actually going to war after this. So we need to learn and train like we fight. We always say it. I think a lot of times we don't actually do it.
Well, I mean, it's human nature, right? Because we go through this
Yeah.
process of going to 3, 4 training rotations, and there's nothing ever at the end of it. And so I think
Yeah,
it's really hard for junior soldiers to get the perception like, I'm
exactly.
going to training again. Here we go. What's the point of it? And so I think the Army is trying to become more strategic of maybe you're not deploying to a security mission in Iraq or somewhere else, but are you going to a Poland rotation? Are you going to a Europe rotation? Is there a big training mission and the one of the AORs that's tied to that training rotation? Because there always needs to be something reinforcing, right?
Mm,
It's the same thing, right? My kid will get bored if I go out and throw the football with him day after day, and he never has that game on Saturday, right? And so I
yeah.
think it's how do I reinforce that training, and we have to make sure we align it with actually execution too.
So you joined before 9/11, and I joined 9/11 happened when I was in high school. So that was one of the distinct reasons that I joined and chose to serve. But what led you to that point to serve before? Like, why did you want to join the Army?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound cliche, but I was looking for a sense of purpose. I mean,
I love it.
I was going to go to college. I had, college acceptance letters, and it wasn't scratching that itch. And I
Yeah.
went to a job fair, college fair, some buddies who were going. And as I'm walking through, an Army recruiter, a young corporal, I didn't know what that rank was at the time, but walked up to me and says, "You look like you could get through basic training." And I felt like at that moment there was a challenge issued, and I just had to explore it, right? And I think that sense of purpose is what kept me in the Army for so long.
Mm. So when you first joined, you got out of basic training. What were some of the distinct challenges that you kind of had to face adapting to that new world? I know, at least for me, I'll never forget going through basic training, and I was Private McMillian, not the, I guess how my dad would say, the sharpest tool in the shed, right? And so I learned a lot through pain. And I remember my drill sergeant always telling me, "All right, McMillian, you're going to learn today. It's either going to be through pain or repetition. So you choose." And I usually always chose pain. I did a lot of push-ups. That's why I'm so strong now.
It's funny after I finished OSA and then went to airborne school and reported my first airborne assignment. I didn't know what I was getting into, right? I mean, you join the Army and you go to basic training and your recruiter tells you all these half truths. Let's put it that way,
Yeah.
right? And,
Yeah.
and then the drill sergeants, prepare you for what it is, but you get to the unit, and that's when the true learning happens, right? Like it's
Hmm.
like, okay, hey, you got a crash course in this, and you get there, and I think I got to my first unit. I was the first 509th down at Fort Polk, and
Oh, you were in Geronimo.
I was a Geronimo, yeah, and
Oh,
I actually, we'll get to that in a minute, but I got there and I didn't know. I still don't know what a soldier was. I didn't know what we
yeah.
did. You know what I mean? And so I got there, and Sergeant Reyes was my first team leader. He not only inspired me, but he struck fear in me too. Um,
Mm,
just every single day it was, hey, did you meet the standard? If not, well, then we're going to correct you to the standard. And there may be a little trauma there, but there's also a lot of learning, right, and a lot of thankfulness. And things that still apply to this day, right? Side note, I also deployed with the 509th in '04 to Iraq. So we're the only time we ever deployed the 509th. So pretty cool time to be there.
can't remember his name now to save my life, but he was my sergeant major in Task Force 2 when I was an OCT over there. And he was in the 509th and deployed with them in 2004, kind of going through that. I'm going to see if I can find his name. He retired as a command sergeant major in the 82nd. So I guarantee you probably know who that guy is. But there's something that you said that I kind of want to make sure that we hit. And I think there's a different way to kind of meet it, but in the military, especially back in that time, there's a standard, and that we have to maintain that standard. So we have the responsibility, is the way I kind of see it, is the before the fact to do what we're supposed to do to the level and the competence that we should. But then when we don't, then we need to be held accountable. And there's a distinct way of how the military, I think, holds people accountable and how the civilian sector holds people accountable. But maybe kind of walk me through that of how is the difference between holding people accountable in the military versus the private sector.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the first thing before we even talk about that is the standard clear, right? Like I think so many
Mm,
times we get into automatically, hey, let's hold somebody accountable. And us as leaders, it's on us, not the soldier or not the employee, to make sure that, hey, this standard is fair, transparent, and it's clearly communicated, right? And I think
yeah,
if we get that right, I don't know if all the times we have to hold someone accountable, right? I think a lot of times there's misconceptions, misunderstanding,
yeah,
or just wasn't understanding of, maybe more importantly, the why behind the standard, right? Like if we can get
yeah,
that right, like now there's a sense of understanding of, hey, well, why are we enforcing this rule, this standard, right? Um, and look, in the Army, like there's a lot of correction methods, a lot of ways we can withhold pay, we can withhold time, we can, hold someone accountable on the report. In the civilian sector, it's very different, right? What I've seen in my 14 months of being a consulting firm is, there are methods to hold people accountable, whether it's just a great relationship with your performance manager and you're having a conversation, and they can go down the road of what's called a performance improvement plan, right? And so
yeah,
compare that to be given a counseling statement from your first line leader in the Army, and they give you corrective actions. At this point, if these corrective actions aren't made, we'll follow up with further action. Same thing in the civilian sector. Hey, here's the performance improvement plan. Here's where you're at. Here's what you're missing, and here's the steps we're going to take in 60 days to get you where you need. Right, and so it's a very like, hey, it should be a very collaborative process too. Right, like Clint and Josh are working together. How are we going to get you to this goal line, right? And so I think that's the way it is. And the difference is that in the civilian sector, the loyalty is to the financial compensation first, and then it's the connections in the workplace, right?
yeah,
Whereas the Army, it's my connection to the organization, to my livelihood, and then money's after that. And so it's kind of
yeah.
inverse. So therefore, I have to tangibly tie it to, hey, this is tied to you still having a job also, right? So very different.
I always think, and I had a guest on Ivy Marsh, and he kind of defined the standard is the bare minimum in your organization just to do well. But as a leader, we always need to be above the bar, above the standard. And And I agree with you 100%. As I think oftentimes, as a leader, especially maybe at that more junior NCO rank, that people believe that, hey, this was clearly communicated to you. You're not doing what we said to do, but it's not clearly communicated. People don't understand the reason that we're doing it. And I remember being a young platoon leader. We were doing 2 to 3 missions a day, and it got to the point of where the guys, it was just going through the motions. And then when we do that, complacency begins to breed and set in. And then that's dangerous, especially on a battlefield. But to me, understanding the why, having a clear task and a purpose, and then what that desired end state is. Because if we can connect, in my mind, the head, the heart, and the hands, then we're going to have true purpose, and we're actually going to be able to make a difference. But I love that. I want to make sure that we kind of sit on that. As a leader, explain the why, give a clear task and a purpose, and then a desired end state, and then unleash chaos. Let your team go and just achieve the mission.
Well, and I think about it in the consulting framework now, right? And we're saying, hey, what is the desired end state, right? Like this is what we're trying to get to, right? And I think if we can paint that picture, we can show that full kind of that continuum of, right? Hey, here's the standard, here's what we're going to do, and here's what we want to get accomplished, right? And so I think that's powerful because you can say this, and then maybe someone in your team can think about an even better ending or better solution that we could get to, right? And so bringing that soldier or bringing that employee along the journey, right? Having them be a part of the collaborative process. We maybe I mean, most times they're smarter than we are, right? So if we
Yeah,
bring that
100%.
conversation, we're going to get even better results, right? Versus just saying, "Hey, do it because I said so," right? Like, hey, that's when I joined the army. It was just do it because I said so. I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but Sergeant so and so told me to go do this. I'm gonna go do this. And now it's like, hey, this is what we're trying to get, and I can like, hey, that's we can do better than that. And now that I know what you're trying to get to, right? So I think it's that collaborative piece that I think is the greatest element we can have.
Yeah, we talk about not being the smartest in the room, and now that I work in acquisitions, so I'm still an infantry officer by trade, but now I'm an acquisition officer, and I have the privilege to work with some of the most amazing people in the world, like MIT Lincoln Labs, all these different national laboratories, some of the most brilliant people that I've ever met. And when I'm talking to them, I have to like, all right, I'm from West Virginia, rural West Virginia, and I'm an infantry officer by trade. So you're just going to need to simplify your talk and bring it down to my level. But it's funny because we're not the smartest people in the room. We're just, I always kind of go back to the metaphor. If you ever, I'm sure you probably are a fan of Megadeth, but Symphony of Destruction, right? Like our job is to take the chaos and make it in a purposeful beam and then continue to move kind of forward. So dude, I love that. But walk me through, you think your first deployment, you were probably a very young soldier, and then you continued to mature. And I know you did multiple deployments, but what were some of those challenges at, an early rank within the military as you continued to deploy? How did those challenges kind of change for you?
Yeah, I mean, I had 3 deployments to Iraq. So
Yeah.
my first one was '04. So I got deployed as a specialist and became sergeant on that first deployment.
Oh, wow.
And when we deployed from the 509th, I grew up as a Cav Scout, kind of in the armor formation, always on the light side of things. But I
Yeah.
was transferred to Bravo Company first 509th, and now I was in the infantry company, right, as a rifleman.
You stepped up in the world. I'm just joking.
I
I'm
mean,
messing with you.
maybe I don't know. I mean, like, look, the IQ level definitely went down when I got there.
Yeah, 100%.
But but holy smokes, it talks about transcendent leadership, right? It didn't matter that I
Yeah,
wasn't 11 Bravo. Leadership leads across all formations and all across all people, right? And so, like,
100%.
I was just going to get there and do me, right? I was going to be a good soldier. I was going to support my NCOs and see where I could add value, right? Now, I didn't know it at the time, but that's what I was doing, right? That's what I've continued to do the rest of my career. But I got there and, hey, how do I show up? How do I do good work? And how do I create value? I think the difference is, nobody had a playbook back in early '04 of what deployment looked like. I mean, even the guys who did the Thunder Run in Iraq, that was a
Mm,
completely different deployment than the rest of the deployments we had, right? So like kind of that
yeah.
04, we're kind of figuring out what that looked like. And leadership as a young, I mean, I turned 21 on my first deployment in Iraq, right? That's how young it was. I mean,
Wow.
here I am as now a sergeant, as a team leader in an infantry company that I'm not infantry, trying to make my way, and so I don't want to say a lot of bumps and bruises, but after your first firefight or after your first mortar attack or IED, you
Yeah.
realize the learning curve. It's got to be fast. You have to learn. You have to ask questions, and you have to get it right. And I think that kind of went over is it so rapidly. I found myself. That was 04, 05. I found myself back in Iraq at 6-7 for just 3 days short of a 16-month deployment with the 82nd. Now I was promoted to staff sergeant the month of deployment, right before we left. I got promoted to staff sergeant. Now, hey, went from a team leader to a year later, I'm in charge of now I'm in a cavalry squadron in charge of an entire section, right? And so,
Well,
I think I turned right before that deployment, I turned 23 or 20, 23, right? So it's like talking to my wife the other day, is like, we were all just trying to do our best. Like we're like, here we are going down range. You're in charge of more soldiers' lives, and you haven't had even a chance for reflection, right? Like, hey, what
mm,
did I do right? And I think that's one of the biggest things I've missed is like, when do I stop and have that conversation with myself? And that deployment changed who I am forever because it was, I mean, a terrible 15 months.
yeah.
Just the things we saw, the things we encountered. And then that was at the end of 07. And then I found myself as a sergeant first class in 10-11 taking a platoon down range and coming back. And completely different at that point too. I was my first time out of an airborne unit and a striker unit, and so just a completely different context. And yet again, leadership transcends a formation; it transcends that operating environment. It's how do I show up, how do I do good work, and how do I become value added.
Two things there that I think need to be restated. And number one is kind of like imposter syndrome, right? That we have when we come into a new organization. And I will tell you, and I was just joking with you before, but the cavalry is just as qualified when it comes to maneuver tactics, if not more qualified, because you guys are really the subject matter experts when it comes to long range reconnaissance and surveillance. And reconnaissance and surveillance, especially in like where I'm working right now, is critical to maneuver. It is either going to drive success or not. It doesn't matter if we know the playbooks on how to maneuver soldiers on the battlefield to achieve those effects. If we don't know what is on the battlefield before we get there to achieve those effects, then we're never going to be able to do it. But I love how you had that curious, committed, coachable mindset. I kind of call it the three C's of just coming in, understanding, hey, I know that I don't have the title of an infantryman, but I'm going to come in and I'm going to figure out a way to add value to the organization. And I think that that can be applied to any job or skill set regardless of what it is that I know that I'm not the subject matter expert, but I know I have a steep learning curve to overcome. So I need to ask powerful questions. I need to move to people with influence. I need to learn from them, and I need to apply it as quickly as possible. So I absolutely love that. And then the other thing that you talked about, and the Army is horrible at this, is reflection time. Is it's one job after another, after another, after another, after another. And I remember, I'm in now 16 years, which is crazy to me to think that I've been for 16 years, dude. I'm getting old, but I have been in a leadership position every year as an officer. Basically, you switch out every year until you get to that rank of field grade, and then that's where you kind of stay in a position for like 2 to 3 years. But I never had time to really reflect on, hey, who am I as an individual and as a leader, and what kind of values do I want to emulate kind of going through it. And I know there was a clear kind of formula because I've always done very well in leadership, but I didn't confidently know who I was or how I could work on those strengths and weaknesses until, we went through that coaching class together, Two Roads Leadership through the Army. That changed my life, man. Like sitting down and really reflecting on who I wanted to be as a leader, both professionally and personally, for myself, for my family, for the organization, for this country. And then I can make decisions at a much more clear place. Like it takes the fog out of leadership when you know who you are. And I'm curious of how do we as an organization, as an army, get better at that to give senior leaders, especially junior leaders, more mentorship in the terms of that type of reflection? Because I know we do AARs, we do hot washes, but there has to be a better way, especially at that junior rank, and kind of building that maturity as we grow.
Yeah, I mean, let's just flip it on its head for a minute, right? The officer construct, you PCS to go to school, the Cratton Career Course, you PCS to ILE, you PC or CGSC, right? And then you're going to PCS to the War Colleges in '06, right? So there
Yeah.
are baked in assignments. There's fellowships, right? I didn't have a single staff assignment. I didn't have a single ROTC assignment. I didn't go on drill sergeant recruiting. I had operational unit after operational
Wow.
unit. My first one was to ACRC. I joined in '01. My first non-operational assignment was in 2013. I had 12 years consecutive operational units, deployable units. I went after a KD complete, Sergeant First Class.
Mm.
And I got there and I made the master list and they made me the brigade first sergeant. So I didn't even get an assignment break.
The brigade first sergeant.
Yeah, right to the brigade
Woo.
first. Hey, congratulations, right? Like, go cut your teeth.
Huh.
And I say this because we don't set up the construct for the enlisted side either to have a developmental break, pause, and
Mm.
think about it, right? But the old saying is, good work is rewarded with more work, right?
100%.
And so, like, well, hey, you're my horse. I'm gonna keep riding you to the finish line. And then I wonder if we build this process of, hey, we need to set it up so there is even an opportunity for reflection in the first place, right? Because most times we have a mission, we have a task, we have a goal. And you kind of talk about the junior NCO, the junior, non-com.
Yeah.
I wonder if, there's got to be a maturity aspect to it also, right?
Yeah.
If my kids say, hey, Dad, we want to eat ice cream for dinner, it's my job as the dad to be like, that's not a good idea. We're not going to eat ice cream for dinner. And so we're in a cultural standpoint right now where our kids or our soldiers think they know better than we do all the time, right? And
Mm.
there's this deference of lack of deference of like, hey, Dad, you're in your 40s. You know what's best for me. We'll eat this and maybe have ice cream for dessert, right? It applies to our soldiers and our young sergeants and staff sergeants. There's this cultural difference of I know better because I saw it on the internet, social media, whatever. Therefore, the power of a senior NCO or company or field grade officer, I think, has diminished some, right? And so we have to work harder to earn that trust and that confidence to say, hey, this is the best thing for you, right? So I think before we even get this reflection, building this piece, we've got to establish confidence and trust that they want to come to us even ask us this question, because there are 1,000 answers out there on the axis of just a little phone before they would even come to us with something about reflection, right? And so it's critical. I think the Army is getting better, right?
Yeah.
They're piloting, from schoolhouses. I can come with kind of, here's what I need to work on out of the schoolhouse, and it should come to my next unit now. It should transfer with me. So we're baking in time when a soldier, they go to basic leader course. The soldier comes back to me with, hey, this is what me and my cadre worked on. This is what they think I can work on. And I think that's powerful, trying to connect that. But we have a long way to develop kind of this reflection piece and how we even, it starts with ourselves, right? If we're not building reflection time, how am I going to ask somebody else to have reflection time?
All right, team, let's take a quick break from this podcast. And I want to personally invite you to our private Facebook community that I call Purposeful Accountable Leaders, or PALS. And PALS is a community dedicated to inspiring and developing servant leaders by sharing transformational stories and skills, exactly what Tells of Leadership is all about. My goal is to build a community of like-minded leaders that can share lessons learned, ask questions, and celebrate wins when it happens. And my mission in life is clear. I will end toxic leadership by sharing transformational stories and skills, and you will find countless transformational leaders in this group. Many of them I have had the honor to serve with in the military. If you want to find a community that can help you grow both personally and professionally, we would love to have you. You can simply search Purposeful Accountable Leaders on Facebook or click the Leadership Resources tab in the show notes to join. I am looking forward to seeing you guys and continuing to grow together on our leadership journey. Back to the podcast. Yeah, I always go back to one of the leaders that I had, Captain McKenzie, and this was when I was a brand new, coming back as a brand new executive officer. Really, he had a concept of white space. To me, it was a game changer because I was very new in the military. I just got back from Afghanistan. It was go 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 go, do more with less type mindset. But he wanted to fill the calendar up with white space, and you could be NCO time, hip pocket training, which is just really the opportunity to allow the non-commissioned officer corps to train their soldiers. But that was kind of illuminating from the standpoint that when we develop white space on our calendars deliberately, it gives us that time for reflection. But I feel like in the military, there's a joke at the Pentagon that the Army specifically, if you drop a bunch of Army officers off on a deserted island like Castaway, within 15 minutes, we'll have a 24-hour guard shift and we'll have a roaming patrol around the island and no one's going to get any sleep. So it just doesn't matter. But that's kind of like our mentality, is that we have to be doing something, because if we're just sitting there and not doing something, then we kind of feel like we're not being as proactive as possible. But you said something else that I love, and I would love to hear your wisdom on it. How do you earn trust? And I think that's one of the hardest things to do from an unauthentic perspective. If you're authentic and you just genuinely care about people and you make decisions for the organization and not yourself, and you're selfless, not selfish, it's easy to build trust. But from your perspective, how do you build trust?
Yeah, I mean, let's put a disclaimer. I used the word wisdom and me, so I don't know if that goes hand in hand, right? So let's just have a disclaimer for those people watching this. That's a long bridge to cross. So I want to talk about that in the context of me now being in the civilian sector, right? Like,
Mm,
cool. We talked about imposter syndrome, and I could speak an hour on that, right? But trust, how did I earn trust in my consulting firm where I'm at with 14 months, right? And
yeah.
being vulnerable is where you start at. Like, earning trust
Mm,
is being vulnerable, right? Every time I facilitate a workshop, I talk to the stakeholder, I share about myself. I was in Boston 2 weeks ago facilitating a workshop for a Fortune 500 company. And when I did my about slide and I put it up there, I have to earn trust right then before we facilitate for the next 2 days, or I'm not going to get the participants to really dive in. I put pictures of my kids up there. I put pictures of the house we built up there. I put pictures of my wife, and I told stories that were from my heart of who I am, right? And I think building trust starts with making that connection with somebody, and it's that vulnerable. I remember as a young sergeant not knowing a dang thing about my first sergeant. I didn't know a single thing about my sergeant major, right? And
oh wow.
flip that in my head to today, when I was retired as a command sergeant major, it was I did NCO PT. I was present. I was always sharing things about my mistakes, about my failures. And I think being vulnerable is how we create trust. Now, you have to follow it up with, your word, right? Like, hey, I said I'm going to do X, I said I'm going to do Y, and I follow through that. And if I couldn't do X or Y, then Z is the explanation, I think, right? Like, hey, I tried to do this. This is with the outcome, but here's what we're going to do, right? But it's being vulnerable, just telling somebody, hey, I don't have all the answers, or it's, hey, we're going to work through this together, And I think a lot of times, just having that moment of saying, like, I put my pants on one leg at a time, just like you do, right? Because we put that CEO, we put that sergeant major, that general on this pedestal of like, oh my gosh, they're general, right? Millie or George, they just took over, right? Like they put their pants on the same way we do too, right? It's just a little different at that level. And so I think it's being vulnerable and sharing that story. So,
Mm.
it's kind of my perspective on it.
Yeah, I love that. And there was one of the best books that I've read so far, and I'm going to kind of try to create a journal series on this too, of how leaders can be vulnerable. And I think from a standpoint, that is what separates, good leaders from extraordinary. That just little bit extra, that ability to be more authentic from a standpoint of, hey, sharing vulnerable stories, showing that, hey, you have a chink in your armor, that you are not the subject matter expert, you do not have all the answers, you do have faults, and you do get things wrong, because leadership's chaotic. The leadership role in itself is going to be very unpopular, but I feel a lot of, especially nowadays, people want to either be popular or they want to make the popular decisions because they want to chase more of a popularity because they think that that makes them a successful leader, versus making the unpopular decisions for the goodness of the organization, which puts them in the kind of that unpopular spot. But in my mind, I genuinely believe that that is being, extremely vulnerable. And it kind of explaining it from the standpoint is that, hey, team, I know that this would be a much easier life for us if we do this, but we need to think about it from a long-term perspective. And this is what we need to do. But sharing those touch points with your family and some of the stories that made you who you are today, and just having candid conversations. I remember when I was a company commander, I would always try to do the rule of three every week, talk to three soldiers that I didn't know for like 15 minutes. And usually it was like really, really awkward because it was like, hey, here's this company commander talking to like this private, and this private is like, okay, he has an agenda. He's trying to like get me, like, see what I did over the weekend or something like that. But it was never from that standpoint. It was that, hey, just genuinely tell me about yourself, man. I'll tell you this. Like, I'm from rural West Virginia, and my dad used to make moonshine. He may or may not still make moonshine. I can't confirm or deny that fact. So like something like that. And then it just opens up, because humor, especially humor, it kind of disarms. And that's what I've learned from that standpoint. And then you said another thing that I just absolutely love. You can say all the right things. You can come in and have the best, command philosophy in the world, but if your deeds don't align with your words, it doesn't mean anything. So I always had a Gablestone operator, or a soft operator, was a battalion commander for one of the live fires we did, and he told me this, and it still resonates to today: is deeds, not words. Your deeds have to be aligned with your words, but if you just say stuff and never follow through, I think you're never going to be able to establish trust. But Clint, I would love to kind of get now into like your sergeant major time. So moving through the ranks of non-commissioned officer, you achieve the pinnacle of the rank of sergeant major. I don't think you got to command sergeant major, but it doesn't matter, because that is like a significant milestone that a lot of people never hit. That is a huge achievement. And how did your leadership have to mature when you got to more strategic rank?
Well, I actually retired as the command sergeant major for 214 Cav at a Scopa Barracks, Hawaii.
Okay.
So, yeah, so I graduated the Sergeant Major's Academy in 2019, and I went right to 191 Cav and the 173rd over in Germany, right? Like, dream assignment, I'm
Mm,
gonna go be in the herd. And one of the biggest things they told us at the academy was, the moment you put a star on your chest,
mm,
they don't know if you've been a sergeant major for a day or for 10 years, right? And so talk
yeah.
about this level of expectation the moment you get there. Well, I got to 191 Cav. My dream assignment, I wanted to go to 173rd as a young paratrooper my entire career. And the sitting CSM was activated to take a garrison. So he gave me a high five, and 2 days later, he was at the door. And the next replacement wasn't coming in until 110 days from SFAB. And so here I am with the new smelling freshness from the Sergeant Major's Academy, the new car smell on me. And, my battalion commander in 05 looked to me as the CSM for the first almost 4 months of me getting there. And talk about just getting your face blown back with, like, am I good enough? Is this imposter syndrome? Do
Mm,
I have the actions? I hadn't been in an airborne unit for several years at this point. Been a lot of striker assignments, and
yeah.
so, like, hey, how do I show up? And it was the same thing. Lean into what you're good at. Be value added. And what I noticed was there was a bit of a cultural turnaround that needed to happen. And how do I lean into that perspective of being not a man of the people, but being present, right? Hey, how am I going to
Yeah.
show up? How am I going to have a positive attitude? The biggest things that stuck with me is, I want to be where conditions are terrible with a smile on my face. If it's
I love
raining,
that.
if it's a bad training exercise that we're just we're on troop live fires, platoon live fires, I'd be out there with a smile on my face at 3 a.m. with my face paint on, my night vision on, right? Like I just had a smile on my face, and I would be talking to people, and just that goes a long way, right? And so from there, I believe that doors open when they're supposed to, and doors close when they're supposed to. We got back from a huge live fire, and my battalion commander, now the CSM at the time, called me in the office and said, "Hey, sit down." I'm like, "Oh, this can't be good." Like, "Hey, division is pulling you to be the G3 sergeant major." I'm like, "What?" I mean, this is just mind blowing of a 1-star command. And they said, "You've made a name for yourself. We're going to pull you up to 7th Army Training Command, and you're going to end up being G3 sergeant major." So, I had to take my maroon beret off and put a PC back on, and I cried some silent tears to myself. And when it became, and mind you, I had never been a staff non-commissioned officer. This is my first time, and let's go do it at a division level element. And I was like, talk about, yet again, here we are, learning curve, imposter syndrome. How do I add value? That's being present, right? And I think my company now has this manifesto of be humble, but smart enough to have an ego, right? Be smart enough to know that you are good. And that's one of our manifestos that I think is very powerful. I'm going to be humble, but you got to also know that you are competent. At this point, you know that you can do good work. It's just, let me figure out how to do good work. So I found myself in 7th Army Training Command, Grafenberg, Germany, when COVID hit, right? And now all of a sudden, you had all these tenant brigades reporting to you, and "Hey, Sergeant Major, how do we get our soldiers to airborne school? How do we get our soldiers to Ranger school? Go figure it out," right? And it was like, okay, let me start making phone calls, right? And when I would call from the phone, and I would call the Maneuver Center of Excellence, "Hey, I need to get soldiers housed," it wasn't like, "Well, you've only been a Sergeant Major, you're still frocked," right? And I would call on the phone like, "Hey, I'm Sergeant Major Keeley, 7th Army Training Command G3 Sergeant Major. I'm trying to get through this problem." And I found that nobody cared how long you'd been a sergeant major. Nobody cared that you were frocked. They cared about your competency, right? They cared, could you have a conversation? Were you competent in your craft and what you were doing? And we got people in COVID. We get them on, clean flights from Germany back to America, and we get them in Ranger school, right? And so I kind of patted myself in the back of, hey, how do we do this in this tough environment? And I kind of backpedaled. When I was in 191 Cav, I was selected for CSL for 214 Cav in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to go from Germany to Oconus. And so that was always kind of during the rest of my time in Germany was this thought of, what do I want to be as a command sergeant major? And what is my kind of philosophy? What do I think about that's important? So we wrapped up a 15-month stint in Germany, so fast and furious. We PCS to Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, and it was the best assignment of my career. I think just having phenomenal leaders. Obviously, you're next to the greatest beach in the world, right? The beaches in the world. That kind of helps your assignment too, I think, sometimes. And just from day one, it was leadership with a presence, right? It's just, I tell people all the time, let's have presence with a purpose, right? Don't just show up to a training exercise or show up to the cubicle in the cough or at work for no reason, right? Let's have a presence with a purpose, right? And I think that goes a long way. And whatever we do today is, do I have to go in for a meeting? Am I going to go into work just to go to work to sit there, or am I going to be there with a purpose, right? So kind of culminated my time there. I found myself medically retired a year into the assignment and transitioned to the civilian sector. And that's another conversation for another day. But, for that 1 year of my time there, it was probably the most enjoyable time of my 21 years of making an impact with soldiers and, just really seeing development from the non-commissioned officer level, which I played a big hand in.
Dude, so first of all, I'm sorry. I should have done more research. I didn't know that you made it to the rank of command sergeant major. I take everything back that I said before. And that truly is a humbling, man. Like, that is the highest rank that you can make as a non-commissioned officer in the Army. So just kind of like reflecting on that, everyone's listening now. So we'll go back to where Clint said he didn't have any wisdom. listen to everything that this man says, because he does. But dude, I love that leadership with a presence with a purpose. And it all just goes back to don't do stuff just to go do stuff and be busy. And if you ever read the book Traction, I always think of this metaphor of a bald tire spinning in the mud. You can look busy and you can just be doing stuff all day long and just be burning yourself out, but you're not taking purposeful action, meaning that you're not gaining traction and you can't gain momentum and you can't move forward. You have to be able to gain traction. And the only way you do that is by taking purposeful action. And I remember in the military, it used to be so frustrating when I was enlisted before, unpacking connexes, packing them back in, unpacking connexes, packing them back in. And then we're out there for all day at the motor pool. And I'm thinking, like, why are we doing this? Like, it is insane. I still don't know why we did it. But anyway, like,
That
that is
makes
just
that makes
the
two of
epitome.
us on this podcast. I have no idea. It would be like, hey, go down, lay everything out. I'm like, what we just did yesterday. Why are we laying everything out again? Oh, I mean, I feel like back in the era of the Army, it was just to keep us busy. Like
Yeah.
just like God forbid we let you go home. God forbid we let you do something. And it was like, I don't know what to do with you. Like I don't have some training going on. Go and load the Connex. I'm like, what? I
Yeah.
can't. Okay, we'll lay it out again. Like, and we'll spend all day at the motor pool. I mean, God. So if you find out, Josh, hit me up. Let me know why we would do that all day long.
Well, my goal now is to create a robot that unpacks connexes since I'm in acquisitions now. So no soldier ever again is going to have to go through that pain in the motor pool that we went through.
I mean, but there could be something to be said about we develop character through some of those painful things too, right? So
Yeah.
we got to provide opportunities for those painful growth moments as well.
So, transitioning from the Army into the civilian leadership, and I've had the pleasure to have a lot of leaders on here that have made that transition. And we talked about how leadership is different, but maybe kind of just hitting that again. You get out fresh, reaching the pinnacle of your career in the Army, 20 plus years of that world. You get into the civilian sector. Where was your direction and your kind of motivation? What was your plan, and what were some of the challenges that you had to face in navigating that?
Yeah, we talked a minute ago about being vulnerable, right? And
Yeah,
I'm transparent to a fault, my wife will say, right? So, I mean, God bless her for putting up with me. I've had PTSD for years. I've had, some of my issues, nightmares, sleep, not being able to concentrate. And so I didn't have those issues. And I finally dealt with a lot of them as I was a command sergeant. I figured I couldn't tell soldiers to go get mental health, get help, and I wasn't doing it right. I was
yeah,
finding myself drinking a little more frequently, doing things that weren't as healthy to relieve my issues, right? And so I started getting health and found myself with a lot more baggage than I thought I had, right? So I found myself in a med board, actually, not what I intended, not how I had focused getting out of the Army, and that's kind of what happened. The best thing that's ever happened in my life is going through the medical evaluation board. But when I was found fit for, not fit for duty, I found entered myself in a med board in March, and that July I was on terminal leave. I didn't have I didn't have this long runway to say, hey, I'm going to figure out the next chapter of my life. I didn't have this, 2-year launch window to retirement. How do I become a leader? How do I become whatever I want to do next? Right? It was Clint. It's time to get out and find a job. And so I think I started scouring LinkedIn like I think everyone's told to do, and started looking for jobs.
yeah,
And I landed with this amazing consulting firm, Propeller Consulting, who took a chance on me. Right, they took a chance on me. They, it was a very stringent, very hard interview process. And I landed with them. And I've been there 14 months, and I tell you, when you talk about what's the difference in leadership, I really think Propeller has some great situational leadership. When I joined the firm for the first 6 months, my performance manager, and that's what we kind of call your directors or performance managers, right? They have 3 to 5, 3 to 7 consultants underneath them, and they manage them either on a weekly, bi-weekly, where you have one-on-ones and kind of those conversations. And then you see them out obviously in the work streams, right? But like that's when it's just dedicated to your development, weekly or bi-weekly. And my first 6 months, my man Brett, shout out to you, buddy. He was every bit of leader I needed at that point when I joined the firm.
Mm,
He was a dependent. His dad was a retired colonel. He was a dentist. And so he understood the PCSs, the strain, and he was the social connection to the civilian side of the firm that he helped me develop. He wasn't concerned about, hey, Clint, is your PowerPoint great? Is your Excel great? That's not what I needed at that moment. What I needed was someone to help me bridge that gap between being an enlisted sergeant major, right? And then to now being a consultant, right? And so talk about situational leadership. He saw what I needed at that time, and that's the leadership he provided. After those first 6 months, I switched over to a great PM named Henry, and Henry was developmental. I mean, Henry was, all right, let's clean up the work now, right? We need to fix this. We need to fix this. And I tell you what, when I was 39, I had Henry, Josh. It was refreshing to be developed again. At a certain point, the Army kind of stops developing you, and it is now you're charged to develop others, right? And
100%.
and I found myself being on calls and this PowerPoint needs to be fixed. This needs to be fixed. You can fix this. And at first, I was like, oh my gosh. And then it was, let me be humble. Yep, I can always get better because there are a lot of smart people outside of the Army, right? And so I learned a lot. And now I'm on my third performance manager. It kind of switches with clients. And I tell you, like situational leadership, what I needed when I first joined the firm is not what I needed during my half part. And now I have a new performance manager who's providing what I need now. And so there's great leaders outside of the Army. It looks a little different, right? So I'll pause there.
One of the most infuriating things to me is not getting developed. And I remember when I was a lieutenant, the rank of lieutenant, it's like probably for like 4 or 5 years, somewhere around that, from second lieutenant to first lieutenant. I think I was counseled one time, just that entire rank. That is probably the most important rank for a junior officer because it's molding you into that company grade officer. And there's in the military, there's two training ranks: second lieutenant, and then a major, a field grade officer. I have yet to be counseled as a major, except for one time when I first came in by a great leader who ended up to be retired. But that is a theme that I see, is that it's kind of like a hustle culture in a way, but in the military, is that at the detriment to growing individuals, we want to grow our careers and we want to grow the organization to get those results because we have a scarcity mindset. If we don't achieve those results, because we're only in a position for such a short period of time, that we're never going to continue to raise that ladder. So we become so focused on that and we forget about the people. And I used to take it a point of pride to do quarterly discussions with my lieutenants and clearly tell them, like, hey, if you want to top block OER, this is what you have to do. This is what I expect. And then go through the quarter. Did you do these? No. You need to get better at these things. And this is where I rack and stack you. And I remember having one of my lieutenants, I won't say his name, he took offense to it at the time. He's like, oh, how dare you tell me that? But afterwards, when he worked at a HHC for a scout platoon leader, he came back and he was like, sir, it was refreshing having that because I clearly understood where I was with you. I knew what I needed to work on. No one takes the time to do that anymore. So it's being kind, being unkind sometimes. But you can do that in a way where it's constructive candor. And Kim Scott has a really good book, Radical Candor, I think
Yeah,
it's called.
it's behind me. Yep, Ralph Canner. Yep.
Yeah, and that is a science and an art in itself. And I agree with you. The military, lack of a better term, sucks at that.
Yeah.
But the
I've
civilian
got
sector is way better.
two great points kind of tying to this. And
Yeah.
I remember I was an anti-tank first sergeant at Fort Lewis, and it was time for my OER. And I mean, I'd been
Mm,
crushing it, and I was selected to take the division, right? And so I'm leaving to take the first sergeant, and my squadron commander at the time rated me. Oh, so I was taking HHT next, and said, "Well, you're the number 2 out of 6 first sergeants in the squadron." I mean, I was offensive, right? Because nowhere along this process had I ever been counseled of where I rack stack. And I went to his office and I said, I don't agree with this.
yeah.
Can you tell me why I'm 2 out of 6? And what, more importantly, what do I need to do to be number one? Because
Yep.
it wasn't about the rank and time. Is I wanted to be the best, but no one has told me what I need to do. And the lieutenant colonel, squadron commander, who ended up being a brigade commander, just recently retired, great guy, said, "Well, it's more of a gut feeling. Talk about just feeling of just like worthlessness I had over me." And, so fast forward, after my time in HHT, about to take the division company, I had my OER, my NCOR counseling with him, and he said, "Thank you for that conversation." He said, "You made me that night go back and sit down and reflect of, am I developing people? And I should always tie, hey, how am I measuring? And then how do I set goals for those I'm measuring to become better, right?" And so I think it's critical. Like, we can assess people however we want to assess people, but we do the disservice when we say, or we don't provide a way to get better, right? And that's what that's leadership, right? Hey, we want everyone to be their best potential and become that untapped potential. We want to delve into that, right? And so I think that's inherent on us to like, hey, this is where I see you right now. Here's how we get better, right? And that's where we're going to grow. The second thing, and I think it kind of ties back to that developmental thing. I think at lieutenant colonel it stops. You're supposed to be quarterly counseled by a general officer, and there's just not time. We talk about lack of white space, right? Like, I used to have a command sergeant major who told me, it's like, I am more impressed with leaders who take things off of calendars. And he used to always say that. And you're not going to find a lick of white space on a general officer's calendar. Maybe even 4 Thursdays from today, you'll find a 15-minute gap, right? Well, how is this general officer supposed to coach, teach, mentor these battalion commanders? What, every other year at a training event? Like, get out of here. The construct is silly, right? And it's almost like, here's our leadership model, here's our developmental model, but it only applies to staff sergeants and sergeants, and it only applies to soldiers and lieutenants, right? And maybe trooper company battery commanders, right? If you get a good battalion commander who's truly invested, I've seen that, who takes it serious. You might see it if a brigade commander is passionate about field grade development. You might see it there. But after 04, it stops. I do not think they're developed coach, because it's kind of like, well, you're expected to know now. And I think it is the biggest load of crap the Army has of one thing we could, like, I don't know a single battalion commander who doesn't want to be developed. I don't know a single sergeant major who doesn't want to be developed, right? Like, all of us crave to be developed and get better.
All right, team, let's take a quick break from this episode. And I want to share a leadership resource with you, and that is the resiliency-based leadership program. RBLP's vision is to create a worldwide community of practice committed to building and leading resilient teams. So why do you need to build and lead a resilient team? Resilient teams are the key to individual and organizational growth, regardless of being in the military or in the civilian workforce. Building collective teams allows for exponential growth and the team's ability to overcome adversity, adapt, and most importantly, grow. And then bottom line up front, resilient teams are just stronger together. And here's a fact: 99% of the people who take that course recommend it to others. And I'm one of them. I just completed my certification and I highly recommend this. And the great news is it's most likely free to you. And if you're in the military, it is 100% free to you. And if you want to learn more, you can look in the show notes for this episode and find the link and use the discount code JMCMILLION, and that is also in the show notes. Back to the episode. I love that word crave, because that's where my mind went. It's like, I have a thirsting to always continue to grow. And you and I probably share the same thing. It's like, I'm going right now through the resiliency-based leadership program training, and I had to postpone my testing just because where I work for a SOCOM organization now, time is crazy. It's funny, when you were in Boston, I was in Boston. I was up at MIT. I have this ability to where, okay, you're not going to coach me, you're not going to mentor me, I'll grow myself. But I think there's a danger there too, because I could come lopsided in one area, because I'm passionate about leadership. So I tend to gravitate towards that type of training and certifications. And if someone doesn't stretch me, and that's a key word there, I think, being able to stretch me outside of my comfort zone, then I'm never potentially going to grow into the leader I could be. So that's why it's critical. If anyone's listening and you're in the management role, find a way to create white space on your calendar, and then find a way to coach, train, and mentor OCT your team members, because it's going to pay dividends. Because our legacy as a leader isn't what we've done; it's the leaders that we build when we leave, and that's the test. That's the test of leadership, in my mind. Dude, dropping fire. I love it. So I have so many questions, man, and we're already at an hour. It's funny how fast these go.
Let's keep
But
going, man. Send it. What do you got?
so one of the biggest questions that I have is, going through the military and being able to have all this authority and responsibility with you, especially in the civilian sector now. I'm really curious how you're able, and I hate the word balance, but how could you have found harmony between work, family, self in the military, and how's that different now in the civilian sector? And what advice would you be able to give to people in the military to have that type of harmony or fulfillment? Because I feel like too often it's seasonal, extremely seasonal. It's straight military, no family, no self. Or it's, you go on leave for 2 weeks, all family, no self, go back to work. How did you strike that balance going through your career?
Yeah, unpopular opinion. Here we go. It doesn't exist in the Army. I don't
Yeah.
think it does. The Army is a culture that expects you and needs you to run to a bunker and knock it out. Right?
Hmm.
There's no like I can pause. Well, Sergeant, I don't know. This is what we have to do, right? And so it's an all-encompassing thing. And I love my wife. I've been with her for over 21 years, married 20. But the Army came first, and
Yeah.
I hate that I say that, but there's no other way it works. Right now,
Yeah.
you have to figure out some kind of harmony. I love that word so much more than balance, because
Yeah.
there'll never be a balance, right? But maybe it's kind of tilting and it's this way, and then the next time it's this way. And what you hope is over the span of a couple of weeks or a month, you kind of get the more balanced, right? More
Yeah.
harmonious. I don't think it's ever going to be possible unless we start that culture of, can I unplug at night, right? Can I create boundaries? But the inherent problem is I have a soldier who gets a DUI, gets misconduct. The leader now has to go in and take care of that situation. Why can't I deal with that DUI until 8 in the morning tomorrow? Why can't I
Yeah.
put boundaries? Why can't we deal with it the next day? Like, does it make that big of a difference in the moment? I don't know, and I don't say that I have the answer to that. But to where I am in the civilian sector, the most powerful thing I did for my marriage and my family, Josh, was turn my phone off at night. When I go to bed, it's on silent. And people might say I'm kind of rude when I say this. I don't know. But if someone in my family dies, I'll find out about it tomorrow. There's nothing I can do at 2 in the morning. We're not making funeral arrangements. We're not making travel. Like I'll find out when I wake up to go to the gym at 5 in the morning, right? That's what I'll do. And so by being able to put my phone on silent, if I am done working for the day and I put it by my coffee maker, I'm present. Holy
Yeah.
smokes, right? And I think we can do a better job as leaders in the Army of like, stop texting people, leave them alone. You know what I mean? Like at one point, there weren't phones, and if you didn't get the work done during the day, guess what? It didn't happen until the next day, right? And so I think we have to provide space for our soldiers, our employees to just unplug. I'm going to go on. I'm actually headed back up to Boston next week in May, and taking my family with us. It's time for a little trip. And the most powerful thing I'm going to do is I'm going to leave my laptop at home. I'm going to disable my Outlook. I'm going to disable my Slack notifications while I'm on the trip, and I'm going to plug 100%. I'm not that I don't care about what's happening, but I'm going to be more present with my family, right? And so I think we have to
Mm.
do that. And it's been unnerving for my wife at times too, because I am around so much more. We have to redefine what we are as a couple now, right? Like,
Yeah.
well, I found myself with all this time in my hands, like, hey, what? what do we do together now? I'm here. And that's an adjustment in itself too. But I'm thankful for that opportunity that I made it out from over 20 years of service with my family intact, right? And so,
Mm.
and for those young, I got to tell this quick story. I was PFC. It was December of '02. And I'm getting married on block leave. Talk about a PFC thing to do. I'm getting married on Christmas block leave, right? And I was walking at the gym, getting done my workout, in Sergeant Major Cervantes in the 509th, short little firecracker Sergeant Major. Hey, Private, come talk to me. And I went down. What are you doing on leave? And I'm like, this is back in '02. He was asking me when I was on leave. It's so cool now I think about this, right? Hey, Sergeant Major, I'm at parade rest. I'm getting married. And he said, sit down with me. And we sit down on a bench in the gym. And he wanted to let me know that, hey, it's going to be hard. You need to have this conversation with your soon-to-be wife. And
Mm.
when you are there, how can you be present?
Yeah.
I didn't realize how impactful this was at 19, and I'm about to get married to my wife, right? And there was a leader who was vulnerable with me, who was sharing this story and giving me this kind of, hey, here's a hard lesson. Here's what I learned, and here's how you can be better. I mean, crazy that I think about this on this day, that he took a time and space to talk to a private first class. He's a command sergeant major, and he gave me some nuggets that helped me my entire marriage in the Army.
So you and I, similar story. I had 2 days between Ibolic and Ranger School, so I thought it'd be a genius idea to go home and get married. So go get married between Ibolic and Ranger School, 48 hours, fly there, get married, come back,
You have to
and
do it now, or it's not going to happen, right? Like,
yeah, in our mind, we had to do it now, and I end up spending 90 days in Ranger School. Yeah, I extended. So it's just so much fun. I decided to redo Florida all over again, and that was devastating to my wife because we didn't have a conversation. She quit her nursing job, thinking in 60 days after, guaranteed I'm going to graduate. She's going to move up and live with us in Phoenix City, Alabama. Threw a whole wrinkle in the plan. That was step one of chaos caused by the military. Step two, I get to JBLM and we're deploying within 2 weeks. And a short but funny story. The first week that I'm there, they're doing a platoon leader training course, and they take all the platoon leaders out, or soon to be platoon leaders, and they go through this crucible 72-hour event. I did not tell my wife. No one told me that I should probably tell my wife. She thinks that I deploy.
oh
She
no.
goes to the brigade command suite, finds the brigade command chaplain, and is just like, she had no idea. She didn't even know she walked into our brigade, and starts crying, hysterically, thinking that, I deployed. No one told her all these things because we didn't, I was horrible at the time of being a husband, of understanding and setting boundaries and communicating. My battalion commander, after I do this really awesome lane, I crushed it. Like, I'm getting a platoon. He walks up to me and he's like, Josh, did you tell your wife where you are right now? And I'm thinking, I was like, yeah, I think I did. And I was like, well, she thinks you're in Afghanistan. She may or may not be crying in front of the brigade commander and the brigade command sergeant major.
Oh
This
no.
was 2 days into being a lieutenant. And I'm like, I looked at him, I was like, I'm not getting a platoon, am I? He's like, not right now. Yeah, you need a little. I was like, okay. But it's just kind of having that boundary is important, and understanding that type of relationship with your wife and your family is critical. Especially some of the hardest transitions points is when I came back from deployments, because there's a pattern, there's a level of routine that's set, and you're coming in, you're just creating chaos. And 20 years in the military, 20 plus years in the military, you come back, and now how do we live together again, right? Like, how do we continue to grow, and how do we set boundaries? So I applaud you for that, man. It's hard to set boundaries, and for me too, because I have a deep passion of trying to show people another way to be successful in leadership, be vulnerable with you at a sacrifice to my family. Sometimes I may have to miss a soccer game to record a podcast, but I have those conversations now with my kids and my family, and I try to explain to why, like, this is what daddy's trying to do. I'm trying to make the world a better place. I'm trying to grow better leaders, so one day when you wear the uniform, if you choose to do that, maybe someone has heard something that I say and they are a better leader for it, and you deserve a better quality leader. So kind of painting that picture. So, dude, thank you. Thank you for that. Hopefully you got some kick out of that story.
Yeah,
The last question.
you did the manga die. I love it, man. You did the manga die. That's awesome. Yeah.
Last question before we get to the final show segment. So, what if you had to give a piece of advice to someone who is just kind of joining in the military right now? Because I love kind of reconnecting it back to your journey. What would it be? Because you were able to maintain a very successful career and mature, I think, through that personally and professionally. What would your advice be to someone just starting out?
I mean, it's tough, right? Don't be afraid to ask questions, right? I think so many times we're either overwhelmed, we're embarrassed, maybe of kind of like
Yeah.
not looking like the smartest person, right? I think asking questions is the key to success, right? Like, obviously, there's a time not to ask questions, right? It's probably in a live fire range when we're sending bullets down range. But ask questions, right? Like, I don't want to say challenge your leader, but you're deserved leadership. All of us are,
Mm,
right? And so, ask those questions, figure out the why, and be respectful in those questions. But I mean, I think back to all my great leaders who gave me great information. A lot of times, it's because I asked a hard question, like,
yeah.
"Hey, what is the purpose of this? Why are we doing this?" And I continue to do that in my consulting firm. Is like, man, 'cause I feel like I'm a brand new private sometimes in my firm. Like I'm
Mm,
starting again, right? And so I think asking questions to whatever career you're starting off with that's what makes you successful. Hey, have those hard conversations. Ask the questions because I have this big kind of saying: lead your boss to victory.
mm,
Maybe sometimes they haven't thought about this or this answer, right? And now that you're asking the question, you're giving them time and space to think about it and make an answer, right? Or you're giving them a chance to work through the problem set, right? So I think a lot of times asking questions not only helps you, it helps your leader. I mean, it's the most powerful thing we can do as an individual.
It's time for our final show segment that I like to call the Killer Bees. These are the same 4 questions that I ask every guest on the Tales of Leadership podcast. Be brief, be brilliant, be present, and be gone. Question 1. What do you believe separates a good leader from an extraordinary leader?
I truly think that what separates that is the vulnerability. I mean, if
Mm.
you're vulnerable to somebody, it's going to make you the greatest leader in the world.
So question 2. What is one resource that you could recommend to our listeners to kind of grow their leadership capacity?
I mean, life changing for me and you. Two Roads Leadership, Dr. J.R. Platter, check him out. I mean, changed my perspective on leadership.
Yeah, hands down. So question 3, if you could go back in time and give yourself some advice, what would it be?
Slow down. Everything's not a race. I was so hell bent on being promoted to staff sergeant, to sergeant first class, to first sergeant. Like, learn your trade, learn your craft, like become good at what you do, before you get promoted.
All right, last question. How can our listeners find you, and then how can they add value to you?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn, Clint Keeley. It's too easy to find me there. I'm posting at least twice a week, adding value. Just enjoy yourself, whatever you're doing. Have fun doing it, right? Like, I think our recruiting problems in the Army be solved by soldiers who enjoy what they do. If we have a good time and we're posting about it publicly, we're talking about it to our friends and our family, we'll kind
Yeah.
of get this recruiting retention problem kind of righted, right? So have fun. If you're a soldier, have fun. Jump out of airplanes, blow things up, right? Have a good time, right? And then if you're in the private sector or you're going through a transition, reach out to me. I love to give back to veterans, talk about what I learned, what I failed at, and what I kind of where I think I'm winning at. So let me know.
Clint, it has been awesome to have you. Thank you for the flexibility. I know that I've been wanting to have you on the podcast for a long time, but we're in the middle of a move, but I'm glad that we're able to actually make this happen. All right, team, it's time for our after action review. That was an amazing episode with Clint. So, what are the top 3 takeaways that you should have from this episode? I think the first one, I'll label this one adding value. And it's really awesome to bring on leaders like Clint that have went through multiple different career fields. He's spent 20 plus years in the military, and now he is working as a professional consultant. He's still growing, he's still learning, and he still has this mindset of, hey, I'm coming to a team. I don't know what I'm doing. I may or may not have imposter syndrome. So how can I add value to the organization? And when you have that type of mentality of understanding, I want to go to an organization, I want to add value to it, stay coachable, stay curious, and stay committed, you can begin to overcome imposter syndrome. And we do that by asking powerful questions, moving to people who have influence, and then taking action, purposeful action, but from the mindset that we're trying to add value to the team and to the organization, not ourselves. Remember, selfless, not selfish service. The next key takeaway, and I love this quote, and this just may be one of the key takeaways: leadership with a presence with a purpose. Never do something just to be doing something. Everything you do in life, either for yourself, for your family, for your organization, it doesn't matter, needs to be on purpose, purposeful action. Because if you don't have purposeful action, you're just doing stuff to do stuff and to be busy, which will lead to burnout. Your goal is to take purposeful action and continue to move forward. And guess what? If you don't have to be doing something, take it off your calendar and then spend time reflecting on who you are. And that is the third key takeaway. As you grow in your leadership journey, you have to reflect on your leadership. And here's a rule of 100. And I just recently learned it and I love it. 18 minutes a day. Spend 18 minutes a day reflecting on how the day went on your leadership journey. Do that for 1 year or 100 hours. At the end of that 1 year or 100 hours, you'll be 95% better in that one area of your life. So let's focus on doing a leadership challenge for a single year. Spend 18 minutes every single day of learning and discovering who you are. It's kind of what I did. This is where and why I'm at where I'm at right now, is because I went through a leadership coaching training after 15 plus years in the military. I had the experience. I had the wisdom. I've already led thousands of men and women. I've won prestigious leadership awards, but I didn't know who I was because I didn't have time to reflect on that. So reflect on who you are, because then it begins to separate the fog of war and allows you to make clear, decisive decisions. Hey guys, do me a favor. If you like Tells the Leadership podcast, you like the content that I'm bringing to you guys, share this podcast with someone who is a leader of their family, a leader of a team, a leader of themselves. And remember, leadership starts with ourselves. So we are all leaders. This is relevant and pertinent information that can help you grow on your leadership journey. Number 2, make sure you give this a 5-star review. Whatever platform or whatever way that you can leave a review, make sure you're leaving a review for this podcast, because it really helps me grow and extend my message to reach other people. And then number 3, support the show. You can find this on Tells a Leadership /Buzzsprout, or you can go to McMillionLeadershipCoaching.com and you can see all the different content that I have for you guys. So the easiest way to do it is to go to McMillionLeadershipCoaching.com and see all the different blogs and the podcast episodes that I have, and then just support the show. And as always, thank you so much for just listening to this podcast. And I hope and that I pray that the wisdom that Clint brought you can help you in your leadership journey. As always, I am your host, Josh McMillion, saying every day is a gift. Don't waste yours. I'll see you next time.